We start with Dr. Lama Nachman, and with how we fortify trust in the age of GenAI with deepfake detection and safeguarding personal content. Dr. Lama Nachman is an Intel fellow, and she serves as the Director of Intelligent Systems Research Lab with Intel Labs. She's committed to advancing human potential through AI, and her research centers on responsible human-AI collaboration. In her keynote, Dr. Lama is going to discuss with us some of her research on responsible AI and trust in AI, human systems, and she will explore different approaches to improving deepfake detection and protecting user content from unconsented utilization by specifically diffusion models. So the last term, Lama, I think you're going to be shedding a lot of term on the diffusion models. Please help me welcome Dr. Lama to stage.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. And I really want to say that I was completely touched by your speech. Really, I've been to a lot of conferences, and I would say that this is probably one of the best speeches that I've had, that I've listened to. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of our research around trusted media. And with the amazing introduction, you don't need me to introduce the topic again. But let me maybe start by reflecting on how far we've come in AI, and yet how early we are in this journey. And I was trying to put together some kind of a reflection over the last 15 years where we've seen an amazing rise in the capabilities of AI and what it's able to do, which was really fueled by access to data, access to compute, algorithmic innovation, and really access to software frameworks, as well as open source ecosystem, which enabled this virtuous cycle of innovation to go on. And if you just think about 1 year ago, and with the introduction of LLMs and ChatGPT, that kind of opened up a whole set of other opportunities, because now it enabled anyone, people who are not in AI, people who are not programmers, to really investigate what these large capacity models are able to do from a generalization to downstream applications. Essentially, really crowdsourcing, finding the killer apps of this technology. And of course, as we've heard, that also opened up tons of ethical concerns. And I just happened to ask ChatGPT what it thinks the headlines that it might see in ethical AI. And it really got a lot of them spot on, right? I mean, there are a lot of concerns around privacy, around safety, around surveillance, and being used in wars, and to the opening speech. All of these concerns that we look at and we think about every single day, and we really need to be focused quite a bit on, it's really our duty to figure out what we do about them. So within Intel, to the point actually that was mentioned earlier about women and how they are really needed for this field, back in 2016, it was actually a group of women, 7 of us, in fact, that realized that Intel really need to do something about responsible AI. And that, in 2016, that was still early, but we were starting to see a lot of these signs and issues come up. So, we went on for about a couple of years to try to develop a responsible AI framework across Intel that really had multiple pillars. One was around governance, and what I mean by that is ensuring that every project, every product, everything that Intel develops in AI is actually done responsibly. And that's through, agreeing on principles, putting these principles to action through ethical impact assessments, putting together advisory councils that can actually help bring up the capacity of the company to be able to have an inquiry mindset about where these risks might come from. And, that's been ongoing since 2019 across the company. And it really took women to identify that early on and actually put it in action. As a researcher, so I run the Intelligent Systems Research Lab in Intel Labs, And as a researcher, this is a very nascent field, right? Despite the fact that there has been work in this field for a while now, this is really still in its early formation. And as we see GenAI come in, a whole set of new problems are actually showing up. So we've been doing a lot of work across privacy and security. Within my lab, we've been focused on human-AI collaboration and trusted media and safety of AI models. So, even though this is my first time here giving a talk, I actually gave a talk a couple of years ago virtually, and I talked all about human-AI collaboration and how can we really think about bringing the best of humans and AI together rather than just be driven towards how can AI optimize to replace people. I'm not going to talk about this today because of the topic of this conversation, but instead I'll focus on our work in trusted media. And that work really spans 3 different vectors. One is really focused on deepfake detection, and that's really where I'm going to focus most of the presentation. But we're also doing work on responsible generation, because there are times when you actually want to generate deepfakes for actually good reasons, and how do you do that responsibly? And then the third is really about provenance and protecting people's information and ensuring that there is provenance within that chain. So let me start with deepfake detection. And, this has really been, I'm pretty sure I don't have to introduce why this is really important. We've seen it, especially as GenAI has really improved the capabilities of GenAI models to generate deepfakes. We're seeing it essentially be extremely problematic from misinformation, generating all sorts of content that actually resulted in forgery and having people wire money to random places because they got messages from the CFOs and whatever. But really, to me, the most worrisome part about deepfake is that it starts to attack what we as humans believe to be true. Because we are, programmed to believe what we see, right? When we see a video, we believe in the truth of that video. So, and, when we talk about all of these existential threats around, humanity and what can happen, and we start to imagine robots roaming the world, I think actually the most problematic aspect is when we manipulate humans to destroy the world. And that really is one of the reasons that I think deepfake detection needs to be at the core of a lot of the research that's happening. And frankly, it's still a very early space. So the lab that I run is a multidisciplinary lab. So we have a lot of work in social science, design, and AI research. And one of the things that we started with was actually a user study to try to understand, are people able to detect deepfakes when they actually see these videos? And surprisingly enough, they're not. And in fact, if you look at this, and the paper is actually under submission right now, but it's, on average, people have an ability at like 36% to identify a deepfake. So clearly, we can't rely on people's ability to do that. And the other thing is, you'll see a lot of bias on, what type of factors actually impact people's ability to do that, both in terms of who they are and the content that they are seeing. So as a result, really, we've been focused a lot on trying to understand how do we address that issue in a generalizable fashion, right? You can always go and address a specific generator and figure out what to do about it. But the problem is to address it in a more general form, and it's a much harder problem to do. And if you think about the approaches, they tend to really kind of go into 2 different approaches. One is to try to figure out what is specific about the artifacts that get generated by these generators. And the second one is really to focus on what looks human. What's an authentic human signal that you can get out of these videos? And what's interesting is that because it took quite a bit of, thousands of years to actually evolve humans, we don't evolve at the pace of AI. So in some sense, it's easier to understand what's human than try to understand artifacts in GenAI. So there are many, many, many different signals that we can think about, whether it's the way our hearts beat, whether the way that we gaze, whether the way that we speak, our voice when we speak, all of that. So and we've been working on all sorts of different detectors along that. Let me just talk a little bit about one of those, which is the work that we've been doing on PPG. And really, that essentially is all about how the blood flow within the veins end up changing the color in the face in a way that, while you cannot detect it with a human eye, you can actually detect it with a camera. And this is actually the basis of how people can do heart rate detection from just looking at someone's video, right? However, for deepfake detection, what you're really trying to do is not necessarily read the heart rate, but try to really understand whether both the temporal and the spatial changes within the heart rate are actually normal, and they look like what you would see from a human versus what is generated by a GenAI. Of course, I mean, today we don't have generators that can actually have consistent PPG signals. In the future, we might, but it's a bit harder to do for many reasons, including not having a differentiable signal to train on. So basically, we started with that assumption, and we started to look at data across different PPG streams to try to understand, does that actually look different for these different generated videos? And the key here to think about is that it's really all about generalization, right? So the issue is that while you can actually do it for a specific video and a specific set of videos, it's very hard to do it robustly if you have all sorts of different illumination, motion within the videos, occlusions, etc. That's not really an easy problem to solve. So we spent quite a bit of time trying to think about, what are the different features, experimenting with all sorts of different data sets and features to try to understand what can we generate. And we believe that we've essentially validated the assumption that to be able to get to that spatial and temporal coherence of PPG signals, it's very hard to do that with videos that are generated by all sorts of GenAI generators. So what we ended up building as a result of that is really what you see over here. And let me just quickly walk you through this. So essentially, when you get a video coming in, you would take that video and chunk it into segments, because you need to work on temporal regions, right? So you need multiple frames. So we divide it into segments. We take those and we look for the face, or multiple faces, if multiple faces exist within the video. And then we extract all the facial landmarks. From there, we can come up with the region of interest in that area, which is, this area actually tends to be really ripe with the PPG signals. And then, of course, we need to sometimes deform it in ways so that it's consistent. And then we break up that region into multiple different cells. And the idea here is to look for, across that space, right, the spatial coherence within that data. So we take the PPG data from these different points and generate a PPG map that's normalized. And then we actually, to also look for some of the information in the frequency domain, we end up also coming up across the different frames, right, to ensure temporal consistency. We actually create the spectral density map. So what you see here is actually essentially the concatenation of both of these. By taking both of these, we were able to actually show that if you train a classifier, in this specific case a CNN, you're able to actually predict with high accuracy whether something is fake or not in these different segments. And then, of course, you can, the interesting thing here is to actually give that information to the person who's actually looking at that. And you could aggregate this information to give them a decision about the whole video, but being able to see it segment by segment and looking at the confidence level of the classifier essentially gives people an ability to make their own mind and understand where these things might be problematic. Now, as I started saying, this is really all about generalization. And when you look at the data in the top, you could see that if we actually train on this face forensics, I'm not sure if people are aware of this data set, but it's a data set that's collected from different generators. So if you actually take that and train on by taking away a specific generator from that data set and test on that generator that was taken away, you still have really high accuracy, which really says something about the generalization of that notion of human authenticity. In addition, if you compare it to other traditional methods, you see actually even on data set that's in the wild data, you can see actually much better results as well. And this is a data set that we actually put together to try to mimic, outside of these data sets, what real-world deepfakes look like that have a lot of variability across, all sorts of features and so on. Okay, and then of course, we put it in a system to try to ensure that these things are running efficiently. You can process multiple streams and do the whole pipeline so that you're able to enable real-time deepfake detection as people are actually watching the video. They can stop and think and look at this and wonder, is that something that I want to continue to send and share and trust in the way that I'm actually looking at this data? Now, I mentioned that this is one signal, and in fact, we've been working on many, many other modalities, because really, at the end of the day, to be able to make a dent here, you have to ensure that you're constantly ahead of where the GenAI systems are. So, one of the other areas we've been looking at is actually looking at both the eye and the gaze of the eye, and again, looking for that temporal and spatial consistency in that data to ensure that, the way that humans actually gaze and where their eyes are focused on all of that also tends to be something that generalizes very well. And we were able to show that if you can get to that deep representation of that data, you can end up with much more efficient classifiers. So that's on the deepfake detection. I also mentioned the notion of being able to protect people's data. And in the provenance domain, one of the areas that we've been looking at is, how do we enable people to protect their content? So imagine artists who have, generated all content that they want to ensure that they actually get something for it, right? They own that content. But today, the problem is that you have, amazing diffusion models that can take that content and replicate it and create things in that style, take some of that content and recreate it, and so on. So the idea of this work was really to try to essentially empower people to have more control over their own data or over their own content. So one of the things that we've been working on is to try to essentially take that art. So imagine you're an artist with some generated content, and you want to put it out there in the world because you want to advertise your content, but you don't want diffusion models to just steal all of your stuff, right? So basically what we've been working on is an ability to take that content and convert it or protect it by very slight perturbation, where if you actually, with your eyes, you look at that, you're not going to see a difference in that image. However, if a diffusion model tries to use that image to generate other images in that style, it actually cannot do that effectively. And we really do that through essentially training a diffusion model that its job is to convert that image to a very similar image. So we're trying to minimize the reconstruction loss, but at the same time, ensure that both the content and the style is if it's used by another diffusion model, that it would actually result in something that looks very, very different, as well as try to make that image extremely noisy. So that's what we're really trying to do with another diffusion model that's trying to attack this. So in some sense, you're probably seeing a pattern in the ways that we're trying to combat this by really trying to use AI to defeat AI to better get us at a place where we can have any hope to win in these areas. So maybe let me just end with this, because I know we're on a very, very tight schedule, so I'm going to try to stick to my 20 minutes. GenAI is really, so I hope that by talking about all of this, I'm not putting a downer on the fantastic, fantastic possibilities that lie ahead for GenAI. I'm really quite convinced that many of the major societal problems that we have today, including climate, which is one of my biggest concerns, will really be helped dramatically by GenAI, and we see it really changing pretty much every single field. However, we really cannot take our eyes off the ball when it comes to all of the ethical concerns. And these things are not preordained, right? It takes all of us, and all of us in this room, to actually create a better future with AI. And being at a university and being at AUB, which is a university that's very dear to my heart, because actually my late father went here for college. And I've heard so many stories about AUB, and I do follow the research here. I think there is a fantastic opportunity of research in responsible AI. And frankly, it's still very nascent and it's still very early. And it would make a huge difference if we have all of us collaborate together to really bring a better future with AI. So with that, I think I'm on time. Thank you.